Autumn is the perfect time to experience immersive reading. Reading a book while in a location that is reminiscent of the setting in that book helps to bring the tale to life. And sometimes, a book that would normally, in your estimation, just be good can surge to fantastic. Reading a book in a unique and relatable setting can solidify that book as meaningful in your memories. As part of my Literary Apothecary series, I am sharing books that contain a heist narrative. I've got a hefty list of classics, literary fiction, middle grade, and fantasy books to share with you. And along the way, I'm sharing places that I think you should read these books to help make the experience stand out. Something I've learned is most people hardly take notice of you if you're just sitting and reading. Even if you're in a public place, it's kind of like you're just sitting there reading, minding your own business, and people don't mind. In The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins, we have an atmospheric heist story, and I think it is a perfect heist novel to take with you to a museum to sit down and really immerse yourself in this tale. We have a colonel who returns from India. He has brought back with him a gem and has bequeathed it to his niece, I believe, Rachel. Upon her 18th birthday, Rachel puts on the moonstone and wears it in front of all of her guests. And this includes the entertainers who are not from England, from what we can tell. And it includes family members and friends. And when she goes to bed that night, this moonstone, this gem that her uncle has brought back from her from India in possibly not an honest way, goes missing. This is an epistolary novel written in the 1860s, and it is known as one of, if not the first detective story. I love Wilkie Collins' writing. He's funny. He uses satire in very creative ways. He's got mystery. He also really digs deep in moral decisions that people make, not only on an individual basis, but also generally and politically as well. We have the plight of women during this time and unrequited love. Frenchman's Creek by Daphne du Maurier is also a wonderful heist novel, I think, to read during this time of year and to really immerse yourself. I think going to Botanical Garden where they have some moving water. As in this, we follow Donna. Donna is a mother and a wife. You can kind of tell at the beginning that she is not traditional in her actions, but she has been a good wife and a good mother up until this point in the novel when we open this. She tells her husband that she is taking the children and going to a different property that he holds. She seems kind of bored, dissatisfied with her life, and she wants some change. She's happy to take her children with her, but she is also very happy to have her husband stay in London. She goes out to this property. It's been shut up for a long time. And so we learn through Daphne du Maurier's very descriptive writing that it's kind of dusty and there's like blankets covering things. As Donna is kind of acquainting herself with this property, she goes way down to the riverbank and discovers that there is a ship moored there, and on this ship is a pirate, a true blue pirate. She gets to know him and begins a tryst, and they plan heists. She, I don't want to give too much away, but she really takes on this pirate life while continuing to live in this mansion. And there is a big heist. There is a very intense denouement. Whether you agree or not with Donna's decision to have a tryst with this very intellectual, educated man versus kind of the boredom that she's finding in her marriage, the tale is very exciting, and you really do get that feeling of heists and pirates and really kind of determining is, that whole Robin Hood syndrome idea of stealing from the rich to benefit the poor. I was very surprised by this Daphne du Maurier. I had only read Rebecca before, and so to open this up and find this tale inside of here, I recommend that this fall you see if you can grab a copy and try it for yourself. I have The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón, and this is maybe a reverse heist is the better way to categorize this, but such a wonderful book for it's just a nighttime inside of a huge public library, or possibly in a museum that has evening hours, and maybe like a courtyard in the center of the museum that you could sit and read this. So in this, we follow Daniel. This is in the 1940s, I think. Daniel is a boy when this opens up. He spends a lot of the time in the beginning of the novel seemingly trying to figure out the world, figuring out himself, figuring out his relationship with his father, figuring out his relationship with young women that he is sort of involved with. Just because this starts out as a boy, make no mistake, this is an adult novel. But one day his father takes him to the Cemetery of Lost Books, and it is this labyrinth library of banned books. He is inexplicably drawn towards a book by Julian Carax called The Shadow of the Wind, and he takes it from this library labyrinth and brings it home. And from that point on, we discover that there is a mystery surrounding Julian Carax as an author and as a man, and we start to realize that other works of Julian Carax are going missing. People are starting to look for The Shadow of the Wind and can't find it. There are deaths surrounding Julian Carax and his works, and Daniel is right in the middle, embroiled in the mystery of why are his books disappearing? Why are they so sought after by certain people? Why are people ending up dead who are surrounding this? And Daniel really goes into the mystery of figuring out why. So if you look at like the reversed heist, people are going and stealing this man's books. And we span through much of the years of Daniel's life, and with him being an adult and kind of developing that part of his life. So I believe there are other books in this as a series. I think it's called the Cemetery of Forgotten Books series. I have only read this first one, but if you're looking for an immersive reading experience where you go into a library at night, I would highly recommend reading this. I will say, give it some time. It takes a little bit of time to kind of get into it. I think the author diverts a little bit with relationships with young women in the beginning, but I think once we get into the Julian Carax story, the tale really moves fast. Something Fresh by P.G. Wodehouse is another sort of classic-esque heist novel. In this, we follow mostly Ash and Joan, and they are lodging in the same house and run into each other. Well, lo and behold, they actually have mutual acquaintances, and so they end up in this country manor house, and they each have a purpose, which is to recover an item that has been falsely taken. And this novel is very humorous. So if you haven't read P.G. Wodehouse, he's a pretty funny writer. And so there are a lot of humorous occurrences. It's funny enough, in my opinion, to laugh out loud, which I don't say lightly because I don't laugh a lot when I necessarily am reading, but it is just funny. I think P.G. Wodehouse did this novel really well, and it's gives you a insight into like aristocratic life and the life of then the working class. It has a little bit of a modern feel because Joan works and Ash has a career going, but then it's compared blatantly with the young men and women in the aristocratic life who really don't seem to have a purpose and are kind of wandering around aimlessly in life. And so I really enjoyed that and loved the heist take on this novel by P.G. Wodehouse. Okay, next I wanted to highlight just a couple middle grade novels because I also think that middle grade novels are great options for reading in an immersive experience. So the first one that I want to mention is Peter Nimble. This is by Jonathan Auxier. I talk a lot about Sophie Quire, which is my favorite Jonathan Auxier. But the first book that we read as a family was Peter Nimble and His Fantastic Eyes. And you can see with the cover why I would consider this a really great heist novel. In this, we follow Peter. Peter is an orphan. He's very mistreated. Like, it's really awful in the beginning with how he is treated. But he comes across this caravan with this mysterious person, and he ends up with this kind of like trunk, little like wooden box type thing with a lock. Peter Nimble is superhuman in his ability to pick locks, break into places, steal things. I mean, he really is the king of heists. And within this box, he's provided with the opportunity to open it up and to find out what's inside and to figure out how to use it. I should mention that Peter is blind as part of his, from being a baby orphan, he loses his eyes. I will say, this book is not for your sensitive, squeamish middle graders. I would say it is appropriate for older middle graders, possibly even YA, and the main reason is because it is, you know, as Jonathan Auxier's writing style lends itself to, is pretty violent, a little bit gory. I mean, we know why he doesn't have eyes, and it's not like the most pleasant thing. So it is just a caution, but this is such a fantastic tale, and I do love all of the abilities that Peter has to have these mini heists and then, you know, sort of these larger, more impactful heists as well. The Shakespeare Stealer by Gary Blackwood is a historical fiction. It is set in the time of, obviously, William Shakespeare. We have yet another orphan. His name is Widge. Widge gets connected up with a nefarious character, just as Peter Nimble did, and is really kind of taken advantage of. And they end up going into London, and with Widge's ability to write, he is encouraged to steal Shakespeare's play Hamlet. And so we have hijinks ensuing with him attempting but not really wanting to do the right thing. But I think it does a great job of bringing that era and time period to life, especially for middle grade readers, because we've got this Shakespeare theme. I think finding a theater experience, you know, even if you're sitting on the steps outside of, I'm picturing a theater where you can just kind of sit and read. If you're just sitting in a public place, maybe on a bench outside of a theater, this would be a great, pretty quick read. It's about 200 pages to just kind of get into that immersive feeling. Jennifer A. Nielsen is one of my favorite YA middle grade authors. She has written so many phenomenal historical fiction series and standalones, and she also wrote The Mark of the Thief, and this is also a series. It's a little bit more fantasy leaning, and of course Jennifer Nielsen also has the False Prince series, which is very much a fantasy. But what I love about this is that, again, we're pulling in that historical fiction into this. So in this we follow Nick. Nick is in Roman times, finding buildings in your community that maybe have a little bit of Roman architecture-esque feeling. A lot of botanical gardens have these indoor-outdoor feeling buildings where there's a roof held up by columns that feels very Roman. But it is a place where you could go and sit outside and really get immersed into this Roman feeling heist story. Nick discovers an ancient amulet, and this amulet gives him magical powers that are greatly sought after. And so a lot of Roman history is steeped within this, all wrapped up in kind of this fantasy film that makes it a very exciting, engaging series. So this is the first one of, I think, 3 stories. I think this is probably the best one, but I have not read the other 2. And I will say, though, my 11-year-old has blown through the series, so he loved it a lot. There is an audio book version as well. Castle in the Clouds by Kirsten Greer has been translated into English. It is a German novel and as far as a heist novel, it's probably not on anyone's radar as being a heist novel. But I just thought it was sort of this abnormal heist idea. But because of that, I thought it would be a creative book to include for someone who is interested in maybe reading something that's a heist. They're staying at a hotel or maybe work near a hotel and can sit on a bench and read it. It does have a kind of wintry feel, so as the temperatures start to get cooler, hopefully where you live, as we here in the northern hemisphere are starting to move into colder fall temperatures and winter, this would be a great book to pick up and kind of read and be immersive in that story. In this, we follow a young girl named Sophie who is taking kind of, I think, a gap year and is working in a hotel. And she befriends some of the hotel guests, and it turns out that there is a jewelry item that goes missing. And Sophie gets embroiled in this. She is friends with the little children, which I think is really nice. There is also a little bit of a romance with some boys that are staying at the hotel. I don't think this is classified as middle grade, but when I read it, it really felt middle grade. And so that's why I'm including it in this section. But there is an uncovering of the mystery. There is this need to steal the jewelry item. A couple YA fantasy heist novels. The most well-known is probably the Six of Crows duology, with Crooked Kingdom being the second book. In this, we follow Kaz Brecker. Kaz runs a club, and there's a lot of competition within the city that he's in for other clubs, and there are rivalries. But Kaz's rivalry is not simply on behalf of his club. There is a genesis originating from his childhood that makes him rightfully despise a specific owner of another club. Kaz, in this first Six of Crows, he is offered the job to go to this very cold land, Fjerdan land, where there's like this ice court. And his job is to get someone out of prison from there. And he gathers up this crew. And it's one of the reasons why I love YA fantasy heist novels, is because you end up with this crew of ride or die found family friends. So Kaz gets Inej. Inej is like this ninja warrior woman. Then we have Jesper. Jesper has some magical capabilities, and he's sort of like the sharpshooter. We have Nina. Nina is a heartrender. She's able to feel people's heartbeats from afar and be able to control that. We have Matthias, who is Fjerdan himself, who has ended up in jail because of Nina, which causes this whole angst. Then we also have Wylan, who's like an explosives expert. If you're looking for the quintessential well-loved heist YA fantasy novel, Six of Crows is really where it's at. Next is The Gilded Wolves by Roshani Chakshi. This is a beautifully written novel. It actually is a duology with The Silvered Serpents, and actually no, it's a trilogy. There's also there's a third one as well. This is such a perfect book to read if you are near botanical gardens, to go where they have some of these larger buildings that you can sit outside of and really kind of just sort of pretend that you're sitting outside of this like ancient magical society mansion, and there are maybe glittering parties going on inside. I just think that would be the perfect setting for this. There is magic in this. It's really a magic that's limited to certain people, and it's an ancient sort of society magic. And there's a lot of secrets and hidden aspects to this. We have Severin. Severin was part of this kind of secret magical society at one point, but he has been cast out, and he It has bothered him so much, obviously, since that has happened. He also has his brother, who is Tristan, who is sort of like the inventor, the tinkerer character. We also have Layla, who is this very attractive woman who uses her looks to be able to get what she wants. And then we have Enrique, who is super smart about the history of their society and these magical families. And then we also have Sophia. Sophia may be neurodiverse. It seems like she has certain characteristics that would indicate that, but she is brilliant. She is an engineer in a different capacity than Tristan. Again, he kind of tinkers, and she's able to see systems and processes and figure out how to utilize them. They are all forged together to recover something that has been taken, and much of this is the preparation and the heist. I think my biggest drawback in this is there is a lot of angst between some of the female characters and the male characters, the brother, and so for whatever reason, the characters and their interactions bring even more angst to the heist than just the heist themselves. In A Tempest of Tea by Hafsa Faisal, we follow Arthi Casimir. She is such a resilient young lady. She does not have family to speak of. She does have a very close friend. They've kind of connected together, and they run what is called a blood house. And in this blood house, they offer, and this is sort of, it reminds me of like a speakeasy from the 30s where you would go in and you would see surface level, people are just drinking tea, but then knowing that there is this seedier off time where the public isn't necessarily allowed. And in that time, they allow vampires in, and the vampires are able to drink blood there. I think that when this was marketed, that was a big push, was that was a setting. From my experience in reading this, that actually was a very small setting. So if that's something that kind of turns you off, I would say to not let that deter you from reading this. That was a very, in the beginning, part of this. Spindrift, which is the name of her tea blood house, is a big part of Arthi's life, but the description of that part is really very small. Arthi ends up in a situation where her tea house is at risk of being taken over by the government. There is some political colonization things happening in her world where you have kind of the downtrodden, and then you have the empire and the people that are in power. The people that are in power are using that to close down businesses, and Arthi's is one of them. So they have to pay like certain taxes, and she ends up in a situation where her tea house may be on the list of being shut down, and that really causes her to react. It gets a little bit convoluted in that Victor is actually someone who works for the Imperial Guard, and he comes to Arthi and says, hey, I can make sure that your tea house does not get closed down if you agree to work with me to steal this mystical artifact that is in the Artheum, which is an imperial museum. I do think the setting of the Artharium is a very intriguing one, and I think one that lends itself well to going to a museum at night, or again, a botanical gardens, a library, some place where you would kind of be able to imagine the artifacts and the heist. And, you know, I just think it would be such a great immersion opportunity if you read this at night in a setting like that. And so she collects Jin, the friend that I was talking about that she's kind of grown up with. There's also a young lady, Laith, who has come from means, political connections, and socioeconomic power. But because of how she is, her family doesn't accept her, and she continually strives to get that acceptance, and so that's part of the angst in this. But she has joined in on this heist, and then there also is a vampire. But again, we're not talking about, you know, Interview with a Vampire kind of a style. It is just that there are vampires and their characters in this. And so there's a vampire part of this. There's a lot of uncovering that happens in this through the heist planning and then the actual heist itself attempt. And So I think that was one of the reasons why I loved it, is that each character came with a mystery, and some of that gets unwrapped, some of that doesn't, but you do learn a lot about the society and the politics of the world that they're living in. This is a duology. The second book is not coming out, I don't think, until next year, but it is one where I will be auto-buying that second book because I really want to know how Miss Faisal can recover the way that this book twisted at the end. Alison Noel's Stealing Infinity is very much a YA novel. It is part of a series. And in this we have an academy, Grey Wolf Academy, that trains young adults for traveling in time and stealing artifacts. So in this we follow Natasha. At the very beginning of this, she comes into contact with Braxton, and she is kind of put through this test that she's not aware is a test, and kind of shows her mettle. And so she's accepted into this Grey Wolf Academy. Her family really writes her off and doesn't want anything to do with her. The academy is run by this eccentric man who really kind of keeps his pulse very closely on what is going on with all of these young adults, almost in a creepy way. And he is the one who's kind of pulling the strings of the training. So they have to train to be able, you've got a team that you've got to be able to trust. You have to train being able to go back in time, to be able to fight, to be able to recognize the artifacts, all of that. So it has a very intriguing premise, and there is a lot of background goings on between the young adults, as you would imagine in sort of this like boarding school academy feel. So this, I think, is a pretty great gray academia book to read during this time of year, because the Grey Academy is set in this like school setting. I think if you could, find a public setting that felt like that, or because they are going back in time and stealing artifacts, there are settings of kind of these larger buildings that they're having to get into. And I think it's perfect for this time of year. I've often thought with reading this that it would be a really great young adult TV series because of all of the drama that goes on between the young adults. It reminds me, it's like Maxton Hall, sort of. If you've seen that on Amazon Prime, it's like that, but add in time travel and fantasy. But there's actually quite a bit of historical information in here. It actually starts out with like this dictionary kind of explaining what's going on in certain times of history. But again, just be aware this is a series. And so while it sort of resolves, there's a lot that doesn't resolve, and it continues.
Thanks so much for watching. Until next time.